gamers, we are deep in the thick of Broketober right now. A Zelda game last week, Silent Hill 2, Metaphor Refantatio, and Diablo 4 Vessel of Hatred this week, not to mention Call of Duty and Dragon Age the Veilguard later this month. May God have mercy on our wallets during this difficult time. Me personally, I've spent the last 40 hours of my life playing Metaphor Refantatio, and I don't think I'm going to be surprising anyone when I say this is some really good shit. Never made it this far into an Atlas game before, but this one's really got its hooks into me. We'll talk more about that later in the show. For now though, here comes the news. Let's start by returning to the industry's most beleaguered publisher, right now at least, Ubisoft. If you watched last week's show, you would have seen me devote a full third of it to discussing not only Ubisoft's current woes, but also how they got here. Presently, the publisher is in turmoil after Star Wars Outlaws received middling critic reviews and sold poorly, prompting Ubisoft to delay their marquee 2024 release, Assassin's Creed Shadows, into 2025. In addition, the executive committee announced a company-wide investigation into Ubisoft's poor market performance as their stock price slid to just 10 euros a share, down from nearly 100 euros a share back in 2018. This week, Bloomberg reported that Tencent and the Gilmore family are considering taking the company private. The Gilmore family are the family that founded Ubisoft, and Yves Gilmore still serves as its CEO. The Gilmore family has sold off various portions of it to different entities over the years, but they still hold a significant share of Ubisoft, with Tencent owning about 50% of the Gilmore family holding company, which has the voting rights to Ubisoft. It's all very complicated, but basically Ubisoft is a publicly listed company, and the Gilmore family and Tencent want to buy up all outstanding shares to make it a private company once again. So that all sounds like a pretty big transaction, right? I mean, Activision Blizzard King was $69 billion, Take-Two's ill-fated Zynga acquisition cost them $12 billion, Bethesda was $8 billion, hell, Sony paid $3.6 billion for just one studio, Bungie. How much then would it cost to acquire Ubisoft with its 20,000 employees, its massive network of studios, and its vast library of IP? Around 2 billion euros. That is the ballpark current market cap of Ubisoft, which is calculated by the number of outstanding shares times the price of a single share. Compare that market cap to the $26 billion that Take-Two is worth, or the $37 billion that EA is worth. You get a sense of just how undervalued Ubisoft is, and I mean that. The value of the Tom Clancy, Far Cry, and Assassin's Creed IP alone is worth more than $2 billion in the hands of anyone with half a brain. This price point reflects the severe distress inflicted by Ubisoft's current management, and what's wild about this is that Tencent are looking to do this deal in partnership with the very management who brought the company to this position. It may well be an unwilling partnership though, as the Gilmore family's voting rights would likely be sufficient to block any sort of takeover, so this may be a case of Tencent sniffing a bargain and then just having to include the Gilmore family, otherwise the deal wouldn't get off the ground. Always impossible to predict which way this stuff will go, but I will say this: if an acquisition does happen, I expect a lot of job cuts at Ubisoft. They are 20,000 staff for a market cap of $2 billion. Their overheads are the biggest drag on their share price, and while European labor laws do more than most to protect workers, capital's going to capital at some point. When it does hit, I just hope it isn't too brutal. Turning now to Bethesda news, and Starfield's first major expansion, Shattered Space, had a lot riding on it. While the game debuted to strong critic reviews and has still maintained a committed player base on Xbox, the title has not won the sort of lasting affection for which even the most bug-ridden Bethesda games are known. Steam user reviews are a good yardstick to go by. There are over 100,000 reviews logged, and the title sits at a mixed 59%. And while technical issues are kind of what Bethesda Game Studios games are known for, complaints about bugs and performance are actually the least of Starfield's problems. The issues are much deeper, about the focus on procedural generation over handcrafted environments, about loading screens over exploration, about the rather toothless and meandering story, and about a sci-fi world that just lacks imagination. Todd Howard has famously said in the past that it's not how it launches, it's what it becomes, which is a very convenient bar to drop when you've got Fallout 76 on your IMDb page. But he isn't wrong. Games like No Man's Sky, Final Fantasy XIV, and Cyberpunk 2077 are all testament to the fact that post-launch updates can take a game from pariah status to lauded masterpiece, so long as those updates are good. And this is why so much was riding on Shattered Space. It was the chance for Bethesda to begin reshaping Starfield, addressing the feedback from the lackluster launch while adding new content that would expand the experience. One expansion alone may not have been enough to have totally transformed the way we talk about Starfield, but if it was at least on the right trajectory, then people would have cause to be optimistic about the future. Sadly, Shattered Space's reception has been so dire that it has people actively talking about the fact that they're worried about how The Elder Scrolls 6 might land. On OpenCritic, Shattered Space sits at a weak 59, just a few points ahead of Fallout 76's score of 54. Pure Xbox scored it a 5 out of 10, saying, quote, "Starfield Shattered Space is a big disappointment in almost every way. We love the base game for all its flaws, and we were willing this to be the big, exciting DLC drop that'd make us love it all over again. However, what we've got here is a very average narrative expansion that fails to add any big choices, upgrades, new enemies, biomes, loot, or anything that could potentially excite or draw in new players. It's buggy, janky, badly acted in places, and there are a myriad of bugs and performance issues to be ironed out. What a missed opportunity," end quote. The Guardian were a little kinder, but still scored it 2 out of 5 stars, saying, quote, "It isn't all bad, the main story is engaging enough and throws a few interesting choices your way as the 3 ruling houses of the planet Vurankai vie for power. And when the frame rate is stable, Shattered Space is quite pretty, if overwhelmingly monotonously purple. But it is simply more of the same slightly broken Starfield experience, only without any spacefly to add a soupçon of variety. It isn't cheap either," end quote. That last part's true actually. Shattered Space is a full $30 US, making it the same price as Cyberpunk's Phantom Liberty expansion, an expansion that was so good and so meaty that it felt like its own standalone game. Not so for Shattered Space, as the Steam user reviews attest. At the time of writing, the expansion sits at mostly negative 30%, making this the lowest rated Bethesda game studio release across all of Steam. The user reviews for this one are pretty bad, not gonna lie. Velassi says, quote, "Helps with insomnia," end quote. User Beans takes special issue with the price point, saying, quote, "This may be the worst DLC I've ever played, $30 for 4 hours of story content," end quote. And my personal favorite comes from user Winfrey2020, saying, quote, "More like Shattered Space," end quote. God bless Steam reviews. I'll be so mad if they ever remove this feature. Jokes aside, the reviews unanimously point to a release that really doubles down on the Starfield formula rather than trying to evolve it. People have already said that they don't like what Starfield is doing, and rather than try to respond to that by offering something different, Bethesda Game Studios seem to just be offering more of it, but also not so much of it that people feel like they're getting their value for money. Here comes a Starfield designer, Emil Pagliarulo, took an interview with Games Radar where he offered his thoughts on Starfield and its reception, and he said something that I think a lot of people have actually mischaracterized. Here's the actual quote. Quote, "I think in a lot of ways, Starfield is the hardest thing Bethesda has ever done. We pushed ourselves to make something totally different, to just jam into an Xbox the biggest, richest space simulation RPG anyone could imagine. That we pulled it off makes Starfield something of a technical marvel. It's also, in a lot of ways, the best game we've ever made. But for us, most importantly, Starfield has its own unique personality and now sits right next to Fallout and Elder Scrolls," end quote. The reporting on this and the reception on social media was suggesting that Pagliarulo was saying that Starfield was the best game that Bethesda had ever made, which would of course be total nonsense. Morrowind is the best game Bethesda Game Studios has ever made, and I will fight anyone foolish enough to disagree. But he wasn't saying that. He was saying that in some ways, this was the best game they've ever made. And that's not an unfair thing to say if he's maybe talking about like visuals or gunplay or technical polish, which is, you know, all relative. So all in all, I think the beat up around those comments was kind of unfair. But the last part about Starfield sitting alongside Fallout and Elder Scrolls, that's the part that seems really crazy to me. Like, that's just not true. Fallout and Elder Scrolls games both have these adoring fandoms because those games delivered incredible cutting-edge experiences at the time of their release. Morrowind, Skyrim, Fallout 3, New Vegas, hell, even the Fallout TV show helps reinforce the pedigree of that franchise. Starfield is just nowhere close to that, and like I said earlier, Shattered Space was the chance for Bethesda Game Studios to show that it one day might be, and it massively missed the mark. Now attention turns to the Elder Scrolls 6, which was first revealed 6 years ago with little more than a logo animation and a trust me bro smirk from Todd. With Starfield behind them, Bethesda now has to actually make this video game, and there's no shortage of pessimism out there about Bethesda Game Studios' ability to deliver. The last time this studio really blew the doors off the joint was Skyrim back in 2011, 13 years ago, and with a franchise as important as Elder Scrolls, Microsoft really can't afford to let this one go the same way. Microsoft haven't been at all shy to intervene in the case of Halo and 343. Recall that Halo Infinite launched rather strongly, but when it became clear that 343 had no real plan for how to do the whole live service part of their live service game, the wheels quickly came off, resulting in collapsed player counts and a very unhappy community. Following this, Microsoft initiated a change of studio leadership that saw new talent brought in and more junior talent elevated. Since then, the game has found modest levels of success, with seasonal updates being well received and player numbers rallying. Regardless, 343 announced some time ago that they would be moving on from Infinite to focus on the future of the franchise, and late Sunday night we got our first look at what that future might be. A while back, it was reported by a number of outlets that 343 were making the jump from their own proprietary Slipspace engine to Unreal Engine, and 343 just confirmed that by releasing a 6-minute video talking about the move to Unreal. They spun up a number of biomes as a bit of a test case for how they'd use that tech, Take a look. So just to be clear, what you're seeing here is not the first look at a new Halo game. It's actually something called Project Foundry, which is kind of like a tech demo, but the studio says it's more like them building actual real locations and assets to test what they could actually ship in future games. They really stress that this is not a tech demo because apparently there's no smoke and mirrors here, but we of course won't know that until we eventually play something for ourselves, likely many years from now. 343 say the move to Unreal allows them to focus exclusively on game making rather than also needing to be a tech company maintaining a game engine. In an accompanying blog post uploaded to Xbox.com, studio boss Pierre Heinz implies that this will result in more content faster. Quote, "We believe the consumption habits of gamers have changed, the expectations of how fast their content is available," end quote. The blog post also makes clear that one of the reasons for this jump is talent, since it's much easier to hire somebody who already knows how to work with Unreal Engine rather than needing to hire in and then train that person up in an engine that no one else but 343 is using. Funnily enough, that's actually very similar to what CD Projekt Red said when they announced that they were making the jump to Unreal Engine for their future projects as well. The blog post also said that the studio has completely reorganized its internal structure and redesigned its internal processes. The studio boss basically said Halo Infinite was the last entry in the way 343 used to make Halo games, and now they're changing the recipe. With that change of recipe comes a change of studio name. 343 is no more. Say hello to Halo Studios. And yes, it is the worst logo you've ever seen, but to be perfectly honest, it doesn't matter. What matters is what this logo represents, the start of a new era. Heinz put it this way, quote, "If you really break Halo down, there have been two very distinct chapters. Chapter 1, Bungie. Chapter 2, 343 Industries. Now I think we have an audience which is hungry for more, so we're not just going to try to improve the efficiency of development, but change the recipe of how we make Halo games, so we start a new chapter today," end quote. So that chapter 1 and 2 thing, it's true, but I think it's important to remember that we're still technically in chapter 2. 343 may have new leadership, a new structure, new ways of working, and a new engine, but it's still the same studio in the sense that culture takes a lot longer to change than a logo does. For that reason, I think it's important to always view these sorts of rebrands with a pinch of skepticism, but ultimately, I'm really glad to see Microsoft and Halo Studios doing this stuff. We wondered aloud if 343 should continue to be the custodians of the Halo franchise. I mean, they had their shot, and clearly it did not work out for them. Microsoft acknowledged that, and rather than shutter the studio, they worked with a new batch of leaders to transform it, and I respect that a lot. Obviously, we need to see how all of this lands when the actual game's released, but it's cool that Microsoft have chosen to nurture rather than to just sack people, because Lord knows they've done more than enough of that already. To cap all of this off, the blog post made clear that multiple Halo games are currently in development. We don't know what they are, but the post made clear that we won't see any of them for a very long time. But again, it's kind of interesting to imagine that Halo Studios might be working on a mix of big and small projects. Surely we'll get another mainline entry at some point, but maybe they're hard at work on some little spin-off game that pushes the franchise into some new territory the way Halo Wars did. Or maybe we get a game that continues that ODST vibe rather than keeping things centered on John Halo all the time. A visual novel where we get to court Cortana, question mark? I know someone who might be a little jealous if he were chatting up his girl. A quick lightning round to finish off. While we're on the topic of layoffs, Tim Sweeney says that after laying off 830 people in September of last year, Epic Games is now financially sound, whatever that means. Back then he said that Epic had to get its finances in order. Epic Games' financial information is not public, so we have absolutely no sense of what that really means. Since then, Sweeney says that things have improved both financially and in terms of player counts, with Fortnite achieving a new monthly active user peak of over 110 million people, and the Epic Games Store achieving a new monthly active user peak of 70 million people. I'm gonna guess that 69,700,000 of those are Fortnite players, and the remaining 300,000 people are you, who log in each week to collect the free weekly game after seeing it in the sort of free stuff section. You're welcome, Tim Sweeney. Feel free to cut me a generous user referral check anytime you like. Sticking with Epic a while longer, Epic is making a big push into the mobile space, and their strategy is a hell of a lot like their PC strategy, namely, hand out free shit. That's only half the story. The long version is that Epic now has their foothold into Apple and Android devices, where their storefront app can be installed and Epic can begin transacting with consumers directly rather than through Apple or Google. Epic have said they want to entice both consumers and developers to begin using their mobile storefront, and to do that, they're lowering platform fees, they're enabling self-publishing tools, and they're promising over 50 third-party games on their platform by the end of the year. They're also going to be giving away free games to the likes of you and me, because that's kind of Epic's thing at this point. As entrenched as Steam was, this one seems like a battle even harder to wage, owing to the fact that the very hardware you're operating on is rigging the game against you. But Tim Sweeney really does seem like the kind of guy that would hock his own shirt if it meant he could fight just one more day against Apple and Google, and that man's got plenty of money to buy a lot of shirts, so I wouldn't count him out just yet. Speaking of mobile, we're getting a Power World mobile game, and guess who's developing it? Nintendo! No, I'm joking, but it would be very funny. No, it's actually being developed and published by Krafton, most known for PUBG, but also their recent purchase of Tango Gameworks so that we could get ourselves a Hi-Fi Rush sequel. Much love to them for that. The game is being developed by Krafton's PUBG studio, and they say they'll develop a mobile game that, quote, reimagines and adapts the core gameplay elements of Power World for a mobile environment, end quote. Translation? We're going to figure out a way to add a cash shop to this bad boy. Here's some very cool news. Recently, the game director from the Mario Rabbids games, David Soliani, left Ubisoft after more than 2 decades with the company. This past week, he announced that he's teamed up with the former lead designer of Red Dead Redemption, a guy by the name of Christian Cantamessa, and together they formed a new studio called Day for Night. It's being funded by Ed Fries, formerly of Xbox back in the OG days, and their first game is being published by Krafton. Man, these guys are really making a lot of moves lately, aren't they? The project is still under wraps, but the ever-effusive Soliani had this to say, quote, "It's a lullaby for my soul and a serenade to our industry, to the magic and the madness of creating worlds from nothing. It's a story about triumphs, challenges, dreams to light the path we walk together," end quote. I really do love that guy, he's all hard. The Skill Up Team Discord lost their collector's shit when this news broke. Avatar: The Last Airbender is getting the AAA treatment, with Paramount announcing a partnership with Saber Interactive to make it happen. People have been wanting a proper Avatar game since before the Pyramids, and Avatar fans are thrilled that Saber's on the case because they are riding high off the back of the phenomenal success of Space Marine 2. They're now hard at work on the Knights of the Old Republic remake, so it's unclear where the Avatar project will fit into their schedule, but it'll likely be handled by a separate team since Saber has a few teams in operation at any point in time. And finally, Xbox is handing a note around class that reads, "Do you like me? Yes? No?" Recently, the Xbox research team posted a blog that invited feedback from any developer who's making a game, but who isn't putting those games on Xbox. Quote, "If you're making video games, we're interested in hearing from you. If you aren't on Xbox, we'd love to know why. And honestly, if you are using our competitors' products, you probably have a great perspective we could learn from," end quote. Oh man, if I was a developer, I'd be like, how long do we have? Interestingly, this is one of the exact questions that Edmund put to over a dozen AA and indie developers some months ago when we were exploring why developers might or might not want to publish their games onto Xbox. It was a really revealing piece about things like Game Pass deals and consumer habits and third-party approvals. Too much to summarize here, but Microsoft research, if you're at all interested, I'll leave a link to that Patreon article below the like button. So what got announced or delayed this week? Quite a bit actually, and by far the biggest announcement was the confirmation of something leaked a little while ago. Red Dead Redemption is coming to PC. This was initially leaked by an erroneous PSN listing that mentioned a PC port that didn't yet exist, but on October 29th, it will exist. It's the original masterpiece from Rockstar, made playable on PC by a studio by the name of Double 11. It'll feature all the things you'd hope for from a modern-day PC port, including native 4K resolution, support for up to 144Hz refresh, ultra-wide and super-wide aspect ratios, HDR10, and full keyboard and mouse support. It's coming to Steam, Epic, and the Rockstar launcher for the 3 of you out there who prefer to buy your games there. Fantastic news that this opus is finally making its way to PC 14 years after its initial release. Let's hope it doesn't take quite as long to get GTA 6 on PC as well. The other big announcement for the week was that Alien Isolation 2 is happening. Sega and Creative Assembly have announced that Alien Isolation 2 is in early development, a piece of news they shared on the day of the 10th anniversary of the release of Alien Isolation 1. The creative director of the first game, Al Hope, made the announcement on Twitter saying, quote, "We have heard your distress calls loud and clear," end quote. Creative Assembly saw a bunch of layoffs earlier this year as a result of the very expensive cancellation of their extraction shooter Hyenas. It's nice to know that Creative Assembly will be getting back to giving people more of what they want, rather than another live service shooter. We've got enough of those, thank you very much. Speaking of shooters, though of the offline variety, the folks who put together the influential and psychedelic indie first-person shooter Post Void have just announced their next game, and it's definitely taken on a very different vibe. Swedish indie duo YCJY Games has announced Keep Driving, described as an atmospheric management RPG about a road trip across the country. Think the Oregon Trail, only you're driving a beat-up Volvo in the early 2000s to get to a music festival. Sure to hit the notes of elder millennials everywhere, but no release date for this one just yet. Next up, Windblown got an early access release date, and it's soon, 24th of October this year. This is the next game from the Dead Cells studio Motion Twin, though it is worth noting that few, if any, of the original Dead Cells team actually worked on this one, as they've all moved on to new things. Early previews for this one have been really good, and between this, Hades 2, and Rogue Prince of Persia, we certainly are eating good on the indie action game front. More Ubisoft news: Assassin's Creed Mirage is headed to Steam sometime in October. No confirmed date yet, but it is happening. Kind of wild that Mirage actually came to iPhone before it came to Steam, but there you have it. And while we're on the topic of Apple devices, one of last year's most notable and award-winning indie games, Dredge, announced that it would be coming to Mac, iPhone, and Android. This is a very, very excellent Eldritch fishing game from New Zealand, and programmer and writer Joel Mason made this announcement by saying it was, quote, "a huge day for the Steam forum bros who said Dredge looks like a mobile game," end quote. What a legend. A quick shout out to Palworld, which released on PS5 last week in every territory but Japan. Whatever was stopping Pocket Pair seems to have been resolved, as the game is now out in Japan. Guessing they had to triple check with their lawyers on that one or something. Best of luck to that team in their David vs. Goliath legal battle against Nintendo. One delay announcement this past week, and it's for The Alters. This is the very intriguing looking survival management game from the Frostpunk studio 11-bit, where your protagonist is stranded on a distant planet and needs to clone himself to keep things going, as well as deal with all of the weird psychological stuff that comes with that. This was originally planned for late 2024, but it'll now arrive Q1 2025. And one kind of bullshit delisting to round things off this week: the original Horizon Zero Dawn release on PC has been delisted from Steam, ahead of the release of the basically unnecessary remastered version. Some pretty crappy moves from Sony around this remaster. First removing it from the original PSN Classics lineup, then jacking up the price of the original version on PSN, and now this. Of course, the Zero Dawn remaster will require that PC users sign up for the mandatory PSN account, and it will also mean the game will be unavailable for purchase in numerous countries like Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Great move, Sony. Keep it up. You're really crushing it. Don't worry though, this actually isn't the worst bit of Sony remaster news we've got this week, so let's cover that right now. So, what's coming out this week? Well, Sony squeezed out the Until Dawn remaster this week, exclusive to PS5 and PC, and it did not go well at all. It's sitting at a fair 70 on OpenCritic, with most of the reviews praising the game for what it always did well, without remarking that the remaster improves anything truly meaningful. Most of the reviews were for the PS5 version though, and things are a lot worse on Steam, with the title sitting at a mixed 68% and reviews hammering the game on account of bugs, technical issues, and of course that mandatory PSN login. The guys at Digital Foundry also pulled this one apart, saying that a lot of the models and environments have gotten an upgrade, but the remake has significant frame rate and pacing issues, and overall image quality is actually pretty rough. There's also lots of chatter about the recoloring work that's gone into this, with many scenes looking completely different and definitely worse. I guess Sony wanted to have this one out to cash in on the upcoming film adaptation, but man, that movie isn't out anytime soon. Like, you could have taken the time to get this stuff right, so it's a real mystery how it ended up this way. Zoocosis was that body cam horror game featuring mutated animals, and that's come in at a mixed 52% rating on Steam. We featured this one on Put This On Your Radar a while back, but it appears as though it's actually more of a management game than a horror one. Apparently those gross animals can't even hurt you. Some people are really disappointed with what they feel is a bit of a bait and switch, but others are finding fun in it regardless. Throne and Liberty is the new NCSoft MMO that Amazon Games has put out, and boy, it is a popular one. It's maintained a pretty steady concurrent peak user count of around 330,000 players since launch, despite the multitude of criticisms being thrown at it, including shallow quests, slow progression, and some pretty rough free-to-play monetization that has sadly become the norm for NCSoft games and many more like them. It's currently sitting at a mixed 64% rating on Steam, and PC Gamer had a pretty funny write-up about its awful and nonsensical English localization, but still, it's very clear that flashy combat and being free to play is enticing more than enough people to check it out. By the way, Austin is currently playing through this one in preparation for a full review, which will be out soon, so Phoenix Springs is that stunning neo-noir adventure game we featured on Put This On Your Radar last week, and it's landed at a Metacritic score of 74 with quite a bit of a range in the takes. Like you'd expect from an artsy game, some folks think it's a bit obtuse, some folks think it's absolutely brilliant, but everyone seems to agree that it's downright beautiful to look at. Checkpoint Gaming scored it a 9 out of 10, saying, quote, "In refusing to hold your hand and explain every twist to you, Phoenix Springs gives you the thrilling moments of connecting the dots yourself," end quote. Meanwhile, Eurogamer gave it a 3 out of 5, saying, quote, "Phoenix Springs isn't an easy game to love or even particularly like. And yet, as it meandered toward its willfully inconclusive denouement, it got under my skin enough, buzzed around in my brain enough, that I almost immediately played through it again. Its final revelation, its whole structure in fact, suggests a game meant to be revisited, reinterrogated, and picked apart, end quote. Not a bad endorsement for a 3 out of 5 if you ask me. Diablo 4 Vessel of Hatred reviews have dropped and they are impressive, coming in at a mighty 86 on OpenCritic, which makes me very keen to jump into the jungle. PC Gamer scored this one a 90, saying, quote, Vessel of Hatred demonstrates that Blizzard isn't out of ideas on how to improve it further, even on the narrative side of things. Its willingness to stretch what Diablo could be is what impresses me most, and the trust it's earned along the way makes me confident about its future and thrilled to be along for the ride, end quote. Right now I'm working through both Metaphor Refantasio and Silent Hill 2 Remake, but after that it's all Diablo, baby. I've continued to play the game since its initial release, and it's gotten significantly better even before the expansion dropped, so I'm actually quite pumped to get in there and see how much further Blizzard have taken things. And then next month, Path of Exile 2. Man, big 4 weeks for ARPG fans, isn't it? And finally, the most controversial release of last week, Bloober Team's Silent Hill 2 Remake released to universal acclaim, which funnily enough has upset a particular portion of the Silent Hill 2 fanbase to the point where the Wikipedia page got locked down because people were just straight up fabricating 0 out of 10 scores. The director of the original 2001 game, Masashi Tsuboyama, has gotten out there to say everyone should keep in mind, quote, even if you don't know the original, you can just enjoy the remake as it is. Whether it's good or bad doesn't affect the original, end quote. That is, of course, unless you're Sony and you completely pull the original game from sale, but that's beside the point. Silent Hill 2 Remake sits at a mighty 88 on OpenCritic and an overwhelmingly positive 96% on Steam, which just seems like an impossible number. Like Konami actually releasing something good, Bloober Team smashing people's expectations, the Silent Hill community actually happy. What's next? The Rapture? Eurogamer scored this one 5 out of 5, saying, quote, a little light padding and some minor grumbling about the combat aside, there's nothing, not a single thing I wish Bloober had done differently. How it looks, how it sounds, how it plays, how it iterates and modernizes whilst honoring its cherished source material. Silent Hill 2 Remake is as close to perfect as I could have hoped, and my hopes were high, my friend, end quote. GameSpot also gave this a 9 out of 10, saying, quote, by staying true to the original game in extremely important ways and taking calculated risks born from an understanding of the source material, all while being supported further by some of the game's original brains trust, Bloober Team has done what was reasonably considered near impossible, end quote. A huge congrats to Bloober Team, and it really hurts me to say this, but a huge congrats to Konami too. May this be their first step back into our good graces. Next up, Metal Gear Solid Delta. So, what's coming out this week? Well, I don't want to alarm anyone, but a new Game of the Year contender has appeared, and its name is very confusing, but it's Metaphor Refantasio, okay? It's launching on all platforms bar Switch this Friday. This is the new RPG from Atlus's Persona team, branching out from the world of Japanese high schools and using their unique combat systems and game structure to tackle high fantasy, religion, and politics. Reviews for this one are already out, and man, are they impressive. It's currently sitting at a mighty OpenCritic score of 93, making it one of the highest rated games of the year. Friend of the channel, Michael Hyam, gave this one a 9 out of 10 for IGN, saying, quote, there's a certain familiarity in Metaphor Refantasio, but Atlus takes the principles of its already excellent RPGs and refines them in a way that effortlessly ushers you through its brutal and sometimes beautiful new fantasy world. Metaphor Refantasio is poetic and at times idealistic, but it also understands its complexities and that change requires action, and that even far-fetched fantasy stories can serve as inspiration to make our world a better place, end quote. Eurogamer also gave this one 5 out of 5 stars, saying, quote, taken as a straightforward fantasy RPG, Metaphor Refantasio is hard to beat. As Atlus expertly merges nostalgia and modernity, its lofty thematic goals of ending prejudice and overcoming society's collective melancholia are too idealistic, but perhaps that's actually the sort of positivity and hope we need right now. Maybe, above all, the true purpose of fantasy is to provide comfort as we reflect on our own world. If that's the case, Atlus's game is essential, end quote. Like I said, I'm playing this one, I'm 40 hours deep. It is, frankly, incredible. I have so much to say about it that's impossible to summarize it all here, but I will say that Atlus continues to be the modern-day custodian of the JRPG tradition. Not since Final Fantasy VIII have I felt the sort of things that Metaphor is making me feel, as its steampunk fantasy world, high-stakes political intrigue, and its cast of stark, deeply lovable characters all take me back to those halcyon days when Square's name ended in soft rather than Enix, and the JRPG genre was at the absolute forefront of what video games could achieve. TLDR, Metaphor Refantasio is an absolute banger, and if you are at all interested in this one, then do pick it up. I promise you will not be disappointed. Changing gears now, Dragon Ball Z Sparking Zero arrives on October 11th, and it has like 500 Gokus to choose from. For real, this is the spiritual successor to the Budokai series of arena fighters, which features virtually every character from Dragon Ball history, letting you play out the iconic anime battles and even make your own. This one's arriving on all platforms bar Switch. Europa is a delightful looking game we featured on Put This On Your Radar a while back. This is another one of those chill exploration games without combat, which instead puts the emphasis on satisfying movement and gliding as you explore the picturesque world and solve puzzles, learning a bit about nature and humanity along the way. This one's out on all platforms on October 11th. Seems like it's been a while since the days of EA's Fight Night, but Undisputed is looking to change that. This one's out on Friday, and it's purporting to be an authentic boxing sim with realistic physics and at least 60 different punches. Man, I can only think of like 5 at most. This one's coming out on all platforms bar Switch after training in early access for about a year and a half on PC. It's got mostly positive reviews on Steam overall, though it has been more mixed recently. Let's hope that 1.0 can fix that up. Next up is the blatant Helldivers ripoff Starship Troopers Extermination. Shaking my head, Marines shooting giant alien bugs on faraway planets. Pfft, did you really think we wouldn't notice? Since sarcasm is largely dead, I will confirm that I am joking. But I suspect we will see more than a few social media takes unironically spouting that same sentiment when this arrives for all platforms bar Switch on Friday. This one has been kicking around since May last year in early access, and people have been enjoying it. It's a 16-player co-op FPS that captures the vibes of the film with the seal of approval of Casper Van Diem himself. Hopefully this one can live side by side with Helldivers in harmony. Hey, what's your favorite part of Transformers? If you said racing around as a car, then you're in luck, because Transformers Galactic Trials is out on Friday, and it's a racing game with a bit of combat thrown in there as well. This one is from kids game publisher Outright Games, so temper your expectations with this one. It's coming to all platforms on Friday. Remember New World? Well, it's back with a new name that has confused a lot of people. New World Eternum is the new chapter of Amazon's once popular MMO, and it's also getting a launch on PS5 and Xbox alongside a PC revamp, all of which arrives Tuesday next week. They made a lot of changes to this one to try and give it more long-term staying power. It will be really interesting to see how it lands. And finally on Tuesday is Nomada Studios' Never. This is their follow-up to the really wonderful Gris. This one tells the story of a young woman and her cool wolf companion. This one's being published by Devolver once more, and from the looks of things, I got a pretty good feeling about this one too. One more thing coming out this week that we haven't mentioned yet, so put this on your radar. This is Shady Knight, and if you're thinking, hey, that kind of looks like first-person Devil May Cry meets Mirror's Edge, then you are not alone, my friend. I love a good acrobatic first-person combat game, and Shady Knight looks like it has all the chops to be a lot of fun. It mixes swordplay, archery, acrobatic abilities, and an all-important grappling hook that will hopefully make you feel at least a little bit like Dante. If you like the look of it, you can grab it later this week, or at the very least, wishlist it, since that always helps developers out in a really big way. Sort of free stuff time now. Kicking things off as always is Epic. Right now you can still grab the delightful management game Bear and Breakfast until October 11th, but after that it's being replaced by 2 games, Empyrean Galactic Survival and Outliver Tribulation, both of which kind of sound like fake video games, but I assure you they are not. Empyrean is a sandbox game that's kind of like if No Man's Sky went all in on being a more complex PC survival sim, while Outliver Tribulation is an interesting little third-person survival horror action game from a 3-man outfit based in Nigeria, and it's infused with a lot of African mythology, which is not something you see a lot of, so that's cool. The Xbox Game Pass refresh was announced last week and includes a few highlights. You've got MLB The Show from notable Xbox publisher PlayStation Studios, Annapurna's narrative adventure Open Roads, and the excellent and challenging kung fu game Sifu. If you like a combat a little more goofy, then there's Mad Streets, which is channeling those Gang Beast vibes. And you've also got the fantastic Inscription, which is well worth playing if you need a spooky fix for Halloween. And lastly, Nintendo has finally remembered that F-Zero exists. Last week it dropped 2 Game Boy Advance F-Zero games on Nintendo Switch Online, F-Zero GP Legend and F-Zero Climax, the latter of which was previously released in Japan only. Some incredible tech for the GBA in Climax, I'm told. It's got a full track editor and everything. Will we ever see a new F-Zero game from Nintendo? Absolutely not. So I guess we'll just have to settle for them letting us relive the glory days. Alright, it's been a long show, so for our feel-good story for the week, let's make it fast. And there's nothing faster than Sonic. You've seen him run, but have you seen him dance? You probably have. But have you seen him dancing on a baseball pitch surrounded by cheerleaders? If you have, you're probably a Japanese baseball fan who goes to games. But for the rest of you, enjoy! Not gonna lie, Sonic has got some moves. Me, I got no moves. After sitting on my butt for 40 hours playing Metaphor Refantasio, I feel like my Apple Watch is about to stage an intervention and call an ambulance on my behalf. I'll be midway through a boss battle and they'll be trying to haul me out on a stretcher. I don't care though. I'm gonna keep going. Metaphor is just too good, and Silent Hill 2 is as well for that matter. That's the end of this week's show. A very big thank you for stopping by as always.
So Starfield has been out for a little over a week now, and the discourse surrounding it has been mixed to negative. I mean, looking at Steam review scores, the OG game, the base game's already got mixed reception, but the expansion itself, mostly negative reviews from not that many reviews, suggesting it hasn't sold a whole lot, or maybe not as well as Bethesda would like. It certainly hasn't made waves like, say, Phantom Liberty did, and something to note about Phantom Liberty is that it too is $30. You can see right here both are $30, but many have argued that Phantom Liberty just offers a lot more. For a $30 DLC, Shattered Space just felt a little lacking in content is one of the complaints behind it. And you look at Metacritic reviews right here, the sentiments are generally echoing the same thing, with a mixed score of 61% from 20 critic reviews and a 4.9 score from almost 60 user reviews. And then looking at Steam charts, you can see that Shattered Space hasn't increased the 24-hour peaks of this game all that much, again suggesting that its sales isn't dramatically large or anything that will kind of mark a major course correction or major resparking of interest for Starfield. You can see right here that when Shattered Space launched, we saw the game peak at was 21,792 players, which pales in comparison to, say, what Cyberpunk 2077 pulled when it released its Phantom Liberty DLC. Scrolling down here, you can see that at one point the game got almost 300,000 players, 274,000 players after the launch of that DLC. That's when we know that DLC really has had impact in bringing people back to a game. And then beyond that, Starfield, when it comes to placing in, say, Microsoft's own charts, the most played games on Xbox chart, you can see it's still all the way down here, not placing particularly high. Same thing goes for Game Pass. If you look at most popular console and PC games on Game Pass, Starfield is not as high as it should be, given it is a AAA Bethesda game that saw new content launch for it. And the game's numbers pale in comparison even to, say, Fallout 4 and Skyrim. Its 24-hour peaks are lower than these much older games. So the longevity of Starfield is proving to be much more of a struggle compared to some of Bethesda's more seminal entries from the past. And since then, we have seen feedback doled out, and along the way, we have seen people and fans respond in kind, but also we recently saw one of the game's developers actually very politely sort of provide his take on the present backlash. So this right here is Emil, studio design director at Bethesda Game Studios, and he recently posted this article from Games Radar, an interview where there were discussions about how one of the great things about Shattered Space is that they're kind of going for a more traditional style Bethesda exploration, where it's not you having to go to all these different planets. One of the criticisms of Starfield is that it feels like a big world that's been split up into a bunch of little pieces and then put in planets, and none of these individual planets get the full love of one cohesive open world. So exploration felt very fragmented, and then all these other planets that are procedural, the content in them, you could tell just how procedurally generated that content was. It all felt very lifeless and very sort of copied and pasted and rinsed and repeated. And so the goal with Shattered Space was to take you back to the old school ways of Bethesda exploration, where it's just one cohesive, handcrafted open world. Shattered Space just takes place on one planet. Most of its content is confined to just one big open area. So this interview was all about highlighting that and highlighting the just unique aesthetic of the Shattered Space open world. And to Shattered Space's credit, the aesthetic of Varun Kai is among the things that often gets complimented. Aesthetically, I think the game is very pretty and very interesting and very unique in how it looks. But a lot of people ultimately criticize the open world exploration. While it does harken back to the old school style, to the more traditional, more beloved style Bethesda exploration, a lot of people felt that the content within that exploration was still lacking and nowhere near comes to living up to some of Bethesda's best works for expansions and DLCs and the like. And so that was something that one individual here, a fan of Bethesda and someone who was disappointed by Starfield, expressed in response to Emil posting his interview, saying that this individual read the interview and it's been circulating, and to be honest, this is going to be adding fuel to an already smoldering fire amongst disappointed players. It reads as if you and the team are patting yourselves on the head. It's a pat on the head that, based on reviews, may not be warranted. I'll admit I haven't played it yet. Well, that doesn't particularly inspire great confidence, but I can't justify its purchase with its current cost under the current reviews. The tone of the interview, however, is very tone deaf to the wider community. Now, people are allowed to base their purchase decisions on reviews, and to be fair, the reviews have been fairly mixed, and not just among, critics, but also among fans, among content creators, among people who, are champions of Bethesda. Even they are like, this is just kind of disappointing me on numerous levels. Reads right here, you highlight that Bethesda created a handcrafted space reminiscent of previous Bethesda works in contrast to the procedurally generated base game. This only reinforces the issues with the base game and further points out a lack of understanding and engagement from Bethesda. I think the fact that Bethesda even decided to go back to a more traditional model highlights their regret for the fundamental conceptual choice that they made with Starfield, which is split a giant open world across numerous planets. It feels like it's them realizing that they can't just lean on that model because there's only so much that they can handcraft, and the more split up that is across more planets, just the more disjointed and the less enjoyable exploration feels in this game. The very idea of a space game for Bethesda and how it spreads itself thin across, thousands of planets or whatever, with a lot of it being procedurally generated. It's starting to feel like there are regrets behind that based on their approach of this DLC, where they're trying to harken back to more kind of bigger, cohesive, whole, handcrafted spaces. And so I think that just further highlights that Starfield just, it chewed on more than it could swallow. It should have gone for just a handful of planets that were handcrafted, instead of going ambitious with this idea of like a fully mapped out galaxy, when that ultimately leads to dilution that negatively impacts the experience. It further reads right here, you reiterated in the interview that your team poured a lot of creativity into Shattered Space. Fans, even critical ones, don't doubt the passion being put into your games, but you keep making the same mistakes from previous titles and justifying unpopular decisions in this one. A handcrafted space doesn't mean much when it still suffers from what reviews are critical of: poorly written quests, bugs, a lack of meaningful content, and underdelivered material. This individual hasn't played the game, but a lot of critics are kind of very much agreeing that this is the case. It's universal enough of feedback. Like, some people did like Shattered Space, but there's enough of this criticism across the board that there's validity to it. And this statement continues, or this series of tweets continues. These reviews are following a pattern of similar issues with previous Bethesda titles. This is exacerbated when bugs, poorly written quests, lack of meaningful content, and oversaturation of procedural generated material has yet to be addressed in the base game, and comments from both you and Todd Howard have been dismissive of these issues, basically asking that there is a reinvention of the base game, or at the very least an overhauling of aspects of it, kind of like what Cyberpunk 2077 did with its update that came alongside its expansion, the Phantom Liberty expansion. I think a lot of people are seeing that as sort of the golden standard for how you make a comeback for a single-player game that didn't launch to the best reception possible from a studio that's known for its ambitious open world. And a lot of people are still waiting for Bethesda to, I think, do a Cyberpunk-style comeback. This continues. No one wants to see Starfield fail, but your fans would like to see the level of engagement companies like CDPR had with correcting issues with Cyberpunk 2077, whose use of DLCs were an example of how to re-verify issues in the base game. I do want to end on a somewhat possible or maybe positive note. Although Shattered Space is no Far Harbor, the fact that you're responsible for creating content to that degree does demonstrate an ability to do so. A lot of your fans would just like to see that level of content redirected into addressing the issues of the game and to feel like their content or their concerns are not being dismissed. It's usually rare for a developer to respond to an individual's opinions, especially when there's so much backlash happening. Usually the course of action there from a studio is to go radio silent. But Emil responded, and he did so in a way that wasn't hostile or anything. He was very, constructive ultimately, and this feels like a nice conversation, at least that's being had, which is good. But let's see what Emil had to say. He responded with, "Hi, Steven. First of all, I appreciate you taking the time to passionately share your thoughts. I may not agree with everything you wrote, but I understand and appreciate where you're coming from. Twitter/X has never been a place for polite discourse, but I'd like to address what I can. I don't like leaving fans hanging. In fact, I generally say more than I should. We have a community team for a reason, but I think a bridge to the devs is important, and I think that approach I really appreciate about Emil. It can backfire if you are kind of a little too dismissive or hostile towards fans, but it feels like Emil genuinely wants to have a conversation, and I think constructive conversations and communication is always an important facet to any relationship between, a development studio that has so many fans that want to see them succeed, but have opinions about some of their more recent works. First, the interview. As the design director, sometimes I'm asked or instructed to do interviews. I was happy to do that to represent the designers and the studio. Seeing how hard and passionately they worked on Shattered Space, they deserved nothing less. Optimism and excitement are pretty standard for interviews, and I'm generally pretty optimistic and excitable about games by nature. That said, my optimism is in no way meant to be mud in the eye of any dissatisfied fan. That's not how it works. I do think it is a bit silly to expect that a developer will just disparage the game that they're working on alongside their peers right around the time that the game's about to launch. Like, the reason they go on these interviews is to kind of spread positivity about their upcoming work and the stuff that they've worked on and what they're proud of and the like. So, that's just something that's never gonna happen, and that's why critics exist. That's why the whole idea is to send out review copies so that reviewers are able to express their genuine thoughts that are, less biased because of their lack of involvement in working on the game. Now, one thing about Shattered Space that's a little shady is they did not send out review copies for it. Bethesda, the higher-ups, decided that they want Shattered Space to be something that doesn't have reviews out there at launch, so people aren't able to make an informed decision before the launch, which already kind of highlights a lack of confidence in your own product. But then when a game does launch with myriad issues and you have that paired with the lack of reviews at launch, it just looks suspicious. And so that's one area where the optics surrounding Shattered Space aren't particularly good. Now, I imagine that those kinds of decisions aren't up to Emil, and he does say that I'm not saying fans aren't allowed to be dissatisfied or express dissatisfaction. His optimism isn't a representation of that, which, fair enough. He does say, though, I'm also very proud of Shattered Space. We all are. Most of the quests and levels were done by designers who have worked on previous Bethesda games and DLCs, going all the way back to Morrowind. They're good at what they do, and it shows. But I do wonder why a lot of fans feel like there's been this sort of, drop in quality or drop in, content substance. Is it because development for games has become more difficult, but they're expected to ship that level of scale of content within the same time frame as they did for previous DLCs, and so they can ultimately fit less into the pipeline of what they're supposed to work on because there's more complication with game development, but the amount of time they're given to work on stuff hasn't been extended and the like. One thing to note about the Cyberpunk DLC, Phantom Liberty, is that they did have a lot of time to kind of go all out on this one DLC with Bethesda. I mean, they put this DLC out in a much shorter time frame, so they only had so much time to work on this, and that might have impacted just how much they could actually fit into the game in terms of substance within the given time frame that was, reasonable for the developers. Emil continues, if folks haven't played Shattered Space and they liked Starfield, I think they're missing out. If folks have played Shattered Space and still don't like it, that makes me sad, honestly. Just know that we have also been hearing from plenty of people who love it. And yeah, there are definitely folks out there who have expressed that they actually did enjoy the experience, but reception is mixed enough where this is clearly not universally deemed but among Bethesda's best works. Emil continues, maybe it's a game of expectations. Fans want a lot, and we do all we can to accommodate them. Here's what I can tell you. Nobody, and I mean nobody at Bethesda, is patting themselves on the back while ignoring our players. Expectations definitely is a part of it, but the reason the expectations have raised is because what other developers have delivered has raised as well, and so the expectations, kind of go at that level. When you look at what Phantom Liberty delivered as a DLC for $30, it makes a lot of people go, well, why can't other companies on some level try to deliver that level of quality and substance and quantity of content at that price point? Part of the criticism of Shattered DLC is that it's $30 and it doesn't feel like it should be a $30 DLC. And so when you're getting other studios who are delivering, kind of almost overshooting, delivering far more than expected for a $30 expansion, and then we see a company like Bethesda that has been, that has the support of Microsoft now, and that is ultimately a major AAA developer, who feel like they've kind of become a bit complacent in some ways, or dated in some ways, or haven't kept up in some ways, and advanced and kind of pushed the boundaries like, Phantom Liberty did, or hell, like Baldur's Gate 3 did. It makes it feel like those rising expectations as a result of rising quality and quantity and substance of delivery isn't being met. And so, yes, it is a matter of expectations, but I think those expectations come from a place of, we have seen what can be done when potential is maximized. And it feels like Bethesda's potential of what they can deliver at certain price points, and the kinds of content they should be delivering given the resources and manpower that they have from all of their success and in their recent years of success. It just feels like that potential for Bethesda isn't being met. But yeah, fans do want a lot, but Emil does highlight that Bethesda isn't like ignoring fans and saying we did a great job. It's like they're always listening, and they did on some level show that with the update before the Shattered Space DLC that added vehicles and that added a lot of quality of life improvements that, to be fair, should have been in the base game, but that at the very least they did hear that feedback and did course correct on that front. But it's still like not fully where it needs to be, is the general feeling. Emil continues, Starfield is a massive game, and it takes time for us to address things, and that's one thing that CD Projekt did take a lot of. They took a lot of time to make the Phantom Liberty DLC, and Emil, I think, here is basically saying like we can only do so much within a certain time frame. And Starfield right now, when did the original Starfield come out? September 5th, 2023. The game is a little over a year old, and that's just not a whole lot of time to make a whole lot happen, you know what I mean? Like, they made some strides within that year, but I'm curious to see where the game will end up within 2-3 years, and if they will actually continue supporting this game. And if we can see, because No Man's Sky, that took a while before it made the comeback that it did. And again, Cyberpunk, same thing. It took years for them to release the content that's now allowed it to make the comeback. So maybe there's still a chance for Starfield. But Shattered Space, it being the first expansion, the expectations that were on it because of the disappointment for the base game, like, it didn't make the best impression that gives people hope that Starfield can see a level of overhauling or some kind of reinvention that will allow it to kind of be that the game that people expected and hoped this would be, that didn't turn out to be the case at launch, at least. But yeah, game development is always tricky, but with a game as big as Starfield, every fix could potentially break something else. On a technical level, it's very complicated, which is why it takes so much time to make these games, and maybe that's why there's only so much they could do with Shattered Space within the year that they had since the game's launch to release this expansion. Things have just gotten more complicated, and so they can do less within a year than they could do before, you know what I mean? And then Emil finally says, to close, let me just say I love games. I love Bethesda games. I've been playing them since the Terminator days. All I or anyone here wants to do is make those games and then make them better. No ego, no arrogance, just a lot of hard work and appreciation of our fans. And I do genuinely believe that to be the case for all developers. They're really trying their best under the circumstances that they're given, and those circumstances are often chaotic and complicated, and there's just a lot of gears churning behind the scenes that we probably cannot conceive in our heads because we just haven't been in the trenches of game development. So I totally understand that game development is just extremely difficult, and the fact that games exist at all is a bit of a miracle. But at the same time, I think it's important to always be honest about feedback, and despite the hardships of game development, seeing what has been accomplished and you know what we've seen when we see peak games, I think there's nothing wrong with having certain standards and raising those standards, and having companies, you know, kind of have the competitive spirit of like, oh yeah, let's like one up them, because that's when you get amazing new experiences, amazing new games that you thought weren't possible before. That's when you get things that just, you know, become masterpieces and become ingrained in the stones of history and etched in there forever and remembered as classics. You know, that's how those boundaries are pushed, by one-upping each other, which is why people are making comparisons that will hopefully inspire others to follow certain models and certain like quality standards and substance standards and quantity standards for certain price points and the like. But hopefully, we'll see if they'll keep supporting Starfield ultimately on an executive level. With Starfield sales not looking particularly stellar, I have to wonder how much money they're willing to put into allowing developers to take Starfield and make more content and expand upon it and maybe even overhaul it, or whether Shattered Space will shatter hopes on an executive level that this is a project worth investing in, and whether it'll just kind of peter out and they'll ultimately move on to their next big project, Elder Scrolls 6. I suppose only time will tell how things will pan out, but until then, this is the most we've seen in terms of Bethesda responding to backlash surrounding Starfield and Shattered Space, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on the current discourse surrounding this title in the comments below. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.
Companies like Sony often have a problem. Their old games competing with their new games, and like Sony, when your brand is built off those old games having amazingly strong IP, well, you end up losing a lot of money because your average sale price plummets. And today's story is Sony's attempt to fix that problem. You see, while headlines of scalpers buying up PS5 Anniversary Editions were dominating, something else happened, something that very few noticed. See, the State of Play announced Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, and when I reported it, I tried to save you some money. What you'd do, right, is you'd buy the original complete edition of the game, and then you'd hand over your $10 whenever the remaster comes out, so you end up paying less. The bad news is that Sony were onto us. The good news, well, I'm onto them, and I've got backup from today's spot. The PS5 shenanigans, Sony doubled the price of Horizon Zero Dawn Complete Edition. Yep, 2x. It is now $39.99. It used to be $19.99. Of course, if you add in the $10 upgrade price, and you get $49.99, which is the remaster's RRP. And it is a bad look. Zero Dawn Complete Edition was part of the PlayStation Hits collection, and every other game in that collection currently retails $19.99. And to make things feel worse, none of this was talked about publicly in any way. You just would go onto the store and find that that's what the game would cost, and you wouldn't really know any better. What they did here is abundantly clear. It is an artificial price hike. It's just them trying to collect more money. And the thing is, it could actually get them in some trouble. You see, recently Sony stopped selling digital games in retail stores. You can no longer buy game codes. The only place to get a digital PS5 game is the Sony store. And when this happened, regulators in the United Kingdom were actually suspicious. They thought that this could be getting in a monopolistic direction, so I have to wonder how they feel about this. Sony using their complete control over the sales of Zero Dawn digitally to artificially hike the price. Because the fair market value per Sony of this game was $19.99, along with everything else in the PlayStation Hits collection. And if the upgrade is worth $10, which is what they charge for it, then surely the fair value of the new version of the game is $29.99. Of course, it's not. That's why the price increase here with the original Complete Edition feels a little bit artificial. Thing is, this is far from the only strange thing that's happened. Next, we gotta take a look at PC. Well, the good news is us PC gamers have not missed out on the fun, and it's actually more aggressive here. You literally cannot buy Horizon Zero Dawn on Steam, Epic, or standalone. There is only one way you can buy it, and that is the new Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered Bundle. Yeah, that's the only way. That, of course, does include the current Complete Edition and the remaster, and it costs $49.99. Now, there are still cases where you can buy the original Complete Edition because those game keys exist. Sony can't just go and delete all of the game keys that are being sold in other places like, say, GOG, but all of this reveals exactly how they think and their aggressive approach to pricing. Of course, they know their games have got strong long-tail sales, so remakes and remasters can keep the average sale price high for longer and longer. But of course, on PC, it is just a little bit spicier. 170 countries just lost the official ability to play this game because all PlayStation games on PC will have the PSN element for linking your PSN account to get trophies, friends lists, and that sort of thing. The PS blog confirmed this, and it does mean that people in the 170 countries are left out. And even worse, they kind of won't be able to get it at all because the original Complete Edition doesn't exist. It's only in the remaster. Now, yeah, there is the saving grace where game keys for the original exist. You can buy those on GOG or others, but at its core, we're seeing how PlayStation intends to bring the PlayStation model done on the PlayStation Digital Store over to PC and to have the level of price control that they are used to having. And it's from here that their strategy begins to become clear. To check in with other games, Helldivers 2 took a beating for PSN, but it's now recovered. It's got recent reviews at 81%, and the latest patch has actually led to a higher baseline in players. Ragnarok got slammed for PSN launch, but it's recovered. It's at 77% now. A modder even made a tool to circumvent PSN, and it surged so quickly in popularity that he took it down because he was afraid of retribution from PlayStation. But of course, check in with the graph and you can see negative reviews are slowing faster than the positives are rising. So that does mean it's getting more and more positive. And then Ghost of Tsushima, well, it's at 92%. That is barely a dent, and that's a game that needed PSN for multiplayer that released when the whole story was exploding. Now, all of this shows something. It tips us off to their real strategy. So let's understand what PlayStation are actually doing. A lot of enthusiasts are pretty angry at PlayStation. It could be the things I'm talking about today, or it could just be not as many of the Japan-feeling games that they used to have in the past. Those are the people who, of course, will be loving Astro right now. But no, their entire plan is to hit far beyond the immediate enthusiast audience. That audience does not matter. That's why we've not seen them yield in PSN and PC. The thing is, they feel like they have to. Their games are so expensive that they need to hit near 10 million sales for one of their big titles to even be worth making. The Insomniac League made this abundantly clear. Spider-Man 2 needed to sell 7.2 million copies at full price in order to break even. At full price. That's a game that's been out for almost a calendar year, and since then, it's been on sale just 2 times. And there is in fact a sale on right now, but it's a tricky one. It is a sale, you can get it cheaper, but the only thing on sale is the Digital Deluxe Edition. It's 28% off, $57.99 in the UK, so it is cheaper than the regular edition, but it still is pretty damn high. That's another part of their strategy. Do a sale, but only on the Digital Deluxe Edition, so they don't have to decrease the price all that much. Even take Ragnarok. Ragnarok released summer 2022, it's had 8 sales on PSN, and its deepest has only been down to $39.99, which is still a pretty hefty percentage of the original sale price. Now, their current strategy is to expand via film and television. It's a major thing. Herman Holst has talked about it, and it worked incredibly well for The Last of Us. And if things had went right, it would be working for the Horizon television show that would be further along than it is right now. Basically, the director for that got fired this June, so they're undoubtedly pretty pissed off about that, but still, the strategy hasn't changed. And it reminds me of CD Projekt Red. They had a bit of a problem. The Witcher TV show, even though it's extremely mid, has Henry Cavill. It blew up interest. When it did, Witcher 3 sales surged, but the game only cost a few quid, so they didn't really make as much money as they could have. So what I decided to do was look at the price history of Sony's most recent analog, which of course is The Last of Us. The Last of Us Part 2's deepest sale was down to $9.99 USD as recent as April 2023. And if you're a show viewer right at the end of Season 1, that would have been awesome. Soon after, though, Last of Us Part 2 Remaster dropped. When it did, Part 2 went back to its default price of $39.99 and its sales only went down to $29.99, all while Part 2 Remaster was sitting happy at $49.99, with its deepest discount being $39.99. And that means that other than the base product RRP, this is exactly the pricing model that they are doing with Horizon. And that probably means they've got data to support this pricing model working. And well, if you want, you can go and buy The Last of Us Remastered, the PS4 near launch title, for $19.99, which of course is what it is in the PlayStation Hits collection. The whole point of their full remake is that the full remake, The Last of Us Part 1, sells for $69.99 right now, which is more than Part 2, and even on sale the Part 1 remake is $39.99. Now the reason why I went through all of this is because business has got many different facets. Now obviously, we are customers, we buy games, that's the bit that we care about, and in so many cases, we're used to buying games on Steam. Steam is one single marketplace, and it's an absolutely ginormous one with so many games, and that means that if you want to get visibility, you gotta hit the sales button. So we're used to sales happening way faster and way deeper than is normal on some other platforms. It's basically a race to the bottom. Sony, though, do not do that. As you can see today, they diligently work to keep their average sale price high. And there's another company who does it a lot more than Sony do, and that company is Nintendo. Nintendo are so confident that their games are so damn good and so damn unique that they just don't do deep sales at all. Now, obviously, a retailer can do whatever they want, but look at the eShop pricing. Tears of the Kingdom is $69.99. It has never been on sale in the eShop. It's always been that price. They've only discounted Super Mario Odyssey 5 times in the eShop since 2021, and even then, that's only been from its current price of $59.99, yeah, no default decrease in sale price, from $59.99 to $39.99. And then there's Smash Ultimate. It came out in 2018. It has shifted over 30 million copies, and on the eShop, it has never been discounted. Never. Conventional wisdom says that old games are less valuable. Nintendo disagrees, and they still sell millions of copies of their games. This is exactly what Sony wants, but it perhaps might even be more than what they want. It may also be what they need, because their games are so stupidly expensive. Just think of the Spider-Man example. So it's no wonder then that Sony's PS5 Pro has no disk drive. They want digital because that gives them full price control, and if you do buy physical, you will need to buy their upcharged $79.99 disk drive. They are just trying to play a different game to the rest, and this makes it clear. The Insomniac leak tells us that Spider-Man 2 was budgeted at $270 million, with a cost overrun taking it to around $300 million. And the thing is, they expect that to go up. Part of the leaks included slides from what appeared to be an internal postmortem where Ted Price, Insomniac's CEO, had disturbing things to say, worrying things to say for the health of the industry. One slide read, "We have to make future AAA franchise games for $350 million or less." But worse, it continued saying this. In today's dollars, that's like making Spider-Man 2 for $215 million. Yeah, inflation's rough. Of course, it cost $300, so pretty disturbing. And assuming that these targets won't happen and they're talking about $350, well, I think we're going to get close to $400 million. I mean, there's a slide that projected $385 million for Spider-Man 3 and $305 million for Wolverine. So even with $120 million a game being chipped in from Marvel, those numbers are insane. Spider-Man 1 took 2 years and $100 million to develop. Peanuts compared to its sequel, and part of the leaked slide is just a brutal line that says, "Is 3x the investment in Spider-Man 2 evident to anyone who plays the game?" I think to most of us the answer would be some budget increase is evident, but not triple. Those are yesterday's numbers. Leave a comment. What do you think The Last of Us Part 3 will end up costing? You see, Naughty Dog have got a new fantasy IP to launch first that'll probably fit the end-of-generation sort of swan song game that has actually kicked off many of Sony's biggest franchises. After that, for the PlayStation 6, they've got to do The Last of Us Part 3. That's something that will be holding down The Last of Us as a brand, as an IP, also the television show. So if that's $400 million, I certainly wouldn't be surprised. And if your games cost that much, if you need to sell $7.2 million at full price just to break even, and I suppose that's not even including payment processing costs, well, you know it's a high-risk game, but of course it is. What we see is Sony fighting where they are strongest. They're going for cultural dominance, something that Microsoft just does not have whatsoever. And that means that every Sony game has got to be an event. Those are the jewels in their crown, and ideally live service as well. Keep them a little bit more healthy in between. They look at Nintendo. They see that Nintendo do not discount their games because they're goddamn Nintendo. You cannot get a Nintendo game elsewhere. They do not need to do a sale. You will buy Smash, and over 30 million of you have. Sony want the same. They want it to be so that you cannot get a game even close to The Last of Us Part 3 on the Microsoft console, or whatever the next Ghost title is after the one they've just revealed. That is what they are doing. They want it to be at the stage where Microsoft literally cannot compete, in the same way that nobody's able to compete with Nintendo. And if Microsoft's usual is anything to go by, Sony will crush them. But people will not be happy for it because they will be paying more money. If you end up paying $79.99 for The Last of Us Part 3 on launch, I would not be surprised. But as they say, content is king. Cultural value is an important thing. It's a little touch of the meaning that we want from things, that we want from a television show that's fantastic or a game that's fantastic. Microsoft struggles to do that. Sony is able to do it, but at absurdly ballooning costs. Those costs probably won't fall to pieces, and that means Sony needs to innovate not just by pumping out games, but also by innovating on pricing strategy, which is exactly what we've just saw them do. And on the topic of price, even though there's been nothing but bad news, Ubisoft's stock just surged. You can watch the next video to find out why.
I've given Ubisoft a hard time over the years, even as far back as in 2007. One of my first videos was making fun of their TMNT release on the 360.
The new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the Xbox 360. It's pretty much worthless. But if you break your Call of Duty 4 game case, then you can use this one as a replacement. Tubular, dude. Thanks for another quality product, Ubisoft.
Don't worry, I'm still not very funny. And neither are the numbers Ubisoft has been putting up lately. Prince of Persia was mid, Skull and Bones was a quadruple A flop, and Star Wars Outlaws, well, it was a flop. And the crazy thing is, those three flops come after a few good hits. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, mega hit. In February 2024, Ubisoft even reported that Assassin's Creed Mirage successfully harnessed the strength of the Assassin's Creed brand to deliver a back-to-the-roots experience, including the return of fan-favorite gameplay. Mirage did so well that it literally made the entire Assassin's Creed brand overperform for the company. And this was a time when Rainbow Six was doing well, they were hyped about Avatar, the crew was popping off, so that leaves one question in my mind. How the hell do you go from that in February to some investors calling for the CEO on a plate and a potential buyout from Tencent? Let's talk about all that, but first, let's talk about support. If you over remark, that seems like a good place to start. The year was 2015 and Vivendi was looking to get its hook into a new venture. It set its eyes on Ubisoft, and using some tactics Yves Guillemot considered unwelcome, according to Wikipedia, they had managed to garner a 10.4% stake in the company. A hostile takeover seemed imminent. Because Ubisoft is a French company, it only takes acquiring over 30% of shares for the company to be forced to extend an offer, because it's like a French law or something like that. Anyway, that's exactly what happened with Gameloft, another company owned by the Guillemots, and Vivendi bought them. Guillemots out. That was it. To combat a takeover by Vivendi, who had purchased 25.15% of Ubisoft stock by December 2016, the Guillemots asked for help from investors in Canada beefing up their own stock holdings. They even had to fight off giving Vivendi a place on the board during this time, and they were successful there. But reports were still coming out in 2017 that said Vivendi was likely to take over Ubisoft by the end of the year. To combat this, the Guillemot family bought back 4 million shares, and they did that with the help of an investment services provider to hold Vivendi off. Vivendi decided to hold off and in 2018 struck a deal to end any kind of takeover. Who did Vivendi sell those shares to? Tencent. That will be important later. And more importantly, if you've liked the video this far, be sure to consider hitting subscribe, hit that bell to know when notifications go live, especially if you've enjoyed the content this far. By March 2019, Vivendi was completely out of the picture. Well, mostly. 2019 onward would see Ubisoft have success with Far Cry, Watch Dogs, Assassin's Creed franchises, but it would also see them rapidly expand, potentially too much. In mid-2019, they had 16,000 developers on staff and were dropping 5 to 6 AAA games a year, but the sales needed to staff 16,000 people weren't there. And in 2020, they had to do some reorganizing. That's code word for laying people off in the game world. And let's not forget that there were several sexual misconduct accusations leveled at Ubisoft around this time in 2020, which led to internal investigations. Those investigations revealed behavior that led to firings and quiet exits from several top executives. In the same year, they also decided to stop focusing on AAA games and focus on mobile, which we know has bombed for them. But 2021 was a really interesting year. After announcing they would be making a Star Wars game, they received some renewed interest from financiers. They also announced their Quartz blockchain program in December of that year, and everyone hated it. In 2022, they started canceling stuff, a Splinter Cell VR game, Ghost Recon Frontline, and 2 other games that were not yet announced. And while they seemed to be unable to get out of their own way, Tencent was quietly dropping another £300 million into Guillemot Brothers Limited, which is the company that owns Ubisoft. Ys and Tencent were becoming BFFs, with Tencent holding 49.9% of the Guillemot family company by 2022. And Yves Guillemot himself even said that they'd be working closely together with Tencent. Now, they didn't release a lot in 2022, correct me if I'm wrong, but Wikipedia doesn't really list anything for that year. 2023 is where it all kind of falls apart for Ubisoft. They canceled more games, announced more flops, and told more employees that they needed to take responsibility for the company's upcoming projects. They did this while reducing staff from 20,279 to 19,410. They had more layoffs in November and more layoffs in March of 2024. Now 2024 is where things got really bad. Skull and Bones, Ubisoft's first quadruple-A game, flopped hard. Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora fell short of investor expectations. And the big one, Star Wars Outlaws, sold so poorly that Ubisoft released an emergency press blast to investors promising to make it better, release it and all future games on Steam, and they delayed Assassin's Creed Shadows, which had been mired in controversy for months. That's where we are at today, but it gets even juicier. But let's rewind to July for a second. Ubisoft said the gameplay we presented for our 2 highly anticipated upcoming premium titles, Star Wars Outlaws and Assassin's Creed Shadows, was not only praised by players and critics alike, but also highlighted the cutting-edge capabilities of our game engines. And in September, they literally had an emergency press release that announced Star Wars Outlaws failed to meet expectations, that Assassin's Creed Shadows was delayed until February, and that all their games would come to Steam in the future. So why the sudden change of heart? Basically, the investors had enough. At the beginning of the month, AJ Investments sent an open letter to Yves Guillemot and the board of directors asking for his head. They said the company is undervalued, that current management was not it, and that they wanted the company to go private. Something Ubisoft is actively considering right now, but more on that in just a moment. AJ Investments doesn't own a huge stake in the company, but everyone listened this time, which I believe is a big reason the emergency press release went out. Here are some choice quotes from the AJ Investments letter that I found interesting. Ubisoft at current state is mismanaged and shareholders are hostages of Guillemot family members and Tencent who take advantage of them. In our view, investors should begin to reward efforts to refocus development efforts towards core IPs and address glaring cost inefficiencies in financial year 25. Code word for layoffs again. We suggest that Ubisoft allow shareholders to vote for new CEO and allow sale of the business to PE Group or let the Guillemot-led consortium to buy out minorities for fair price. We believe that the Guillemot family and Tencent are discounting potential value of Ubisoft in order to buy more shares at lower valuation and eventually take full control of the company at heavily discounted valuation. They basically accuse the Guillemot family of purposefully releasing subpar content so that they can buy shares at a discount. They're pissed. They point out that Ubisoft is bloated as they are almost twice the size of any other company. Companies such as EA, Take-Two, and Activision Blizzard have much higher revenues and profitability with lower staff and studio talent. Despite having fewer blockbuster titles, Ubisoft employs over 17,000 staff compared to EA's 1,100, Take-Two's 7,500, and Activision Blizzard's 9,500. And all the companies they list had net profits in the millions or billions, while Ubisoft lost $60 million in 2023. What did they want done? Well, they want the Guillemets to sell. They want a mass reduction of staff. They want a refocus on the titles we all love. Titles like Rainbow Six Siege, Assassin's Creed, Far Cry, Watch Dogs, and Tom Clancy titles such as Splinter Cell should be prioritized and cherished, ensuring they maintain their market-leading position. And they want the CEO out, along with other management that led to this failure. And if Ubisoft didn't do anything, well, they basically said that if 60 days pass and they don't see any changes, that they will work with the French government and fight for it to happen anyway. Like I said, they're pissed. So what happened? Well, I do think Ubisoft is going to sell, and there have been 2 reports